Hola and welcome to a new episode of the Roofless Dog and Pony Show. My name is Julio Panicello. I am the dream alchemist at Roofless Painters, a free-range art school and gallery for creative nomads of all stripes. With every episode, we reveal the theme of our next painting collection so you can find out what we will be painting next, and also the reason why. We explain where the painting theme comes from and how it relates to our contemporary time. We explore also different possibilities for visual representation of the concept using images of paintings throughout art history as inspiration while citing stylistic and historical references. In many ways, our episodes are like our paintings, messy and predictable and unvarnished. So watch out because we don't even know what we're going to say and if we're going to have any technical difficulties. But please stick around because it's going to be amazing and we're going to keep it under 30 minutes. So all episodes can be found as video on Instagram and also our YouTube channel, which you should subscribe to, and also as podcast on any podcast platform. So you just have to go to your favorite podcast platform, type the Roofless Dog and Pony Show, and you'll just have a bunch of episodes. And they're great if you are driving or walking or trying to fall asleep. So and you're welcome to contact us or comment below if you have any questions or if you have any comments about this episode and you would like to contribute with your notes to this presentation. We always humbly stand to be corrected. So thanks for being here, and we're just gonna go ahead and mention that this week we were just there's so much that has happened that we had different directions to think about what we would want to paint next. But early this week on Monday, we just came across this old article. Old meaning like September 30th, this September 30th. At the Art newspaper, a website that we check. We try to kind of like check more than the news just because it's much more interesting to be aware of what's going on in the art world than in the rest of the world sometimes. And so David Hockney actually wrote this article for the Art newspaper. And it's fascinating, it's incredible, it's very interesting, and it got us super inspired. The title is Abstraction in Art Has Run Its Course. So he essentially, because he's already I think is over 80 years old, right? Or close to 90 years old. He essentially can say whatever he wants, or he feels he earned the right to say whatever he wants. And we believe he did earn that right. And he also dumped some criticism to the Art newspaper itself at the beginning. But so David Hockney, he's one of his biggest I would say frustrations in regards of like art history is that he mentions, or he says that art historians are too focused on the lives of the artist and not so much on the history or the history of the practice. So he being an artist, a painter, it's fine to know if Van Gogh was sad or lonely or this or that, but he is more interested in how artists sort of like use technique or process. So again, he's saying that art historians are great at talking of the lives of artists, but they're not so great at talking about the history of process and technique. So he, apart from painting, he's essentially made it so he wanted to sort of like go back to art history and find out a little bit of the course of, or the history of art practice, and that's why he just went to Milan, and he stood in front of the Duomo with a mirror, and he proved that even though cameras were not invented or created yet, people have been using photographic tools in order to translate reality. So anyhow, the article goes on, and he goes over the reasons why there was an interest in narration in Europe versus in other civilizations. He's mentioning, for example, the arts of China, Japan, India, and Persia never used shadows or reflections. They also never used vanishing points to show perspective. He explains why, and it's a fascinating article. We're not going to go into too much detail, but what we love is that he's saying that abstract art essentially has run its course, and more so, he pinpoints that perhaps Mondrian, by many critics, it's considered the last abstract artist. So something interesting also that he mentions, he talks about the camera seeing things geometrically and the artist seeing things psychologically. So there's a big distinction between capturing reality and translating it from camera or a device versus a point of view of an artist. It's a really great article, and we highly suggest you find it. We're going to put it on the newsletter that we're going to send. The email that we're going to send after this presentation. But what we also found out in addition to reading this article is looking at art and artists that painted like still lifes, because on Tuesdays we like to sort of like feature a work from an artist from the past that it's focused on still life. And we found this painting, and this painting right here, it's by Avigdor Arica. Avigdor Arica. We've never heard this name. We've never read anything regarding of his work, but he was a monumental, very important artist in the 70s and 80s and 90s that no one wrote about. But we were absolutely mesmerized and hypnotized and fascinated by the simplicity of the subjects in this painting, and the complexity of the composition, the intentional cropping, the way that there's spaciousness, but at the same time there's contraction against certain edges, the simplicity of the chromatic palette, but yet the complexity of the light. So at first, without knowing absolutely anything about this artist, we absolutely fell in love with the work, and we started like reading about the artist, and we found out that there were very serendipitous connections between the way he painted and David Hockney's article. For starters, Arica, who is a French Israeli artist, he died a few years ago. When did he die? 2010. So he started his career as an abstract artist, and he abandoned abstraction in the late 60s, because it didn't work for him anymore. And I'm gonna try to read there are some like articles in the past, in the late 90s, that talk about his vision about art, and I'm gonna quote. I'm gonna read a paragraph of the article. Formerly an abstract artist, Mr. Arica renounced abstractionism in the mid 1960s. Quote: "People who think there is anything new in the arts are idiots." End quote. He told the Washington Post in 1979. Quote, "In my early 30s, I was quite successful as an abstractionist, but I started painting my own set of forms over and over again. Finally, it repulsed me." End quote. So there is something to be said about abstraction running its course, and also discovering these artists who renounced abstraction and then focused on representation. And he focused on representation in a very specific way, because he hated artificial light. He never painted during nighttime or with any sort of like artificial lighting. And that goes back to our first initial feelings about this piece, the sophistication of the values on this piece, and yet the simplicity of the color palette. So he also worked by observation. He was an observational artist. He didn't like or didn't enjoy to work from photographs. And there's something also to be said about that comparison between a camera capturing realism in a very geometric way, and an artist capturing realism or reality in an emotional, psychological way, and making certain decisions to create emotions. So the assignment for this week, or the premise or the concept for this week, we're going to title it VASE Surface. So this painting will be the inspiration for our series. And what we are proposing is inspired by this piece of work, or this amazing painting. We're going to grab one vase from whatever we are around our homes, I guess, and we're going to choose one surface. One vase, one surface. We're going to try to keep the focal points like as minimum as 3 and as maximum, a minimum amount 2, maximum amount 3, counting the background. Because we feel like the background is a focal point in this painting. So vase, it's going to take me a while. Vase, surface, and then what? So we're gonna try to, or we're gonna encourage everyone to paint from life. We're gonna encourage everyone to try to also do this in a single session, because he very much was interested in getting concentration so he could finish a piece of work or a painting in one single session. And then we're going to also talk about composition, because the idea or the concepts that he brought in were not so much realism, but how he arranged the objects or the focal points, not just with themselves, meaning like arranging them on the surface and choosing colors and stuff, but arranging them on the format, on the painting itself. And he used a lot of interesting dramatic, and people use the word radical croppings. So we're going to try to do the opposite of what we suggest when we talk about composition. Find an easy, uncomfortable positions on the retrofitting of the real or the scene on our format that may be completely different than what we are used to, or that conventional wisdom tells us. So we're going to show you a few images related to this work. By the way, this is an example of his abstract period, I would say, or phase, and how he just abandoned this later in his career, and much later. I think this these were like late 60s, I believe, something like that. I'm not sure. Something else that I'm reading from a very interesting article at Boston, at boston.com. On Mr. Arica's canvases, people and objects can be positioned with discomforting asymmetry. I think that's we highlighted these two words, discomforting asymmetry. I'm going to show you something also that's interesting. A different painting. This painting, the one with the vase and the surface, was painted in 1996. And this one right here, it's titled Two Stones, and it was painted in 1977. So there's a big gap, but there are similarities in between both paintings in that sense. So within a single painting, a white expanse like a wall may be offset by a dark expanse, rendering the image at once spacious and oppressive. We thought this was a much better explanation of what we tried to say about this. Expansive and repressive, using just a very simple choice of subjects, and without too many details or focal points to create any kind of narrative or symbolism. It was just kind of like stripped from absolutely everything. In a way, there is a sense of abstraction even with this realism because of the geometry implied. So gonna read something else, and going back to another of his paintings. We're gonna show only his work. So this is a corner of his studio, and looking up, and we've done this before in a way when we painted ceilings. Studio corner with crack in the wall, 1985. And another note, Mr. Arica was born on April 28, 1929. This is very interesting because some art historians, they try to make a connection between him being a Holocaust survivor and the way he painted later in life, and that idea of oppression almost, and isolation that people detected in his work. So he was born in 1929 to a German-speaking Jewish family in what now is Romania. Now it's Ukraine. In 1941, when he was 12, he was deported by the Nazis to a Ukrainian labor camp. And there, on fragments of butcher paper that he found, he started drawing what he saw around him. So there was an impulse to document his context or his surroundings in such a dramatic and hard time. So he survived because in many ways the Red Cross liberated that camp, and then he showed drawings of what people did in the camp. And then I think we don't know the exact accounts, but that was the thing that made the Red Cross just pull him out and his sister, and then they were moved to Palestine. He lived in Palestine for a while. His mom was able to reunite with them. His dad didn't survive the labor camp. So it was an incredibly dramatic life story. But we don't know if he talks about it like later in his life directly. But certainly art critics and historians have made a connection between him surviving a labor camp in the 1940s and then the way he painted later. So another thing that's also very much connected with the David Hockney article about abstract art running its course and being over. Arica was deeply influenced by Asian art. Mr. Arica liked to paint fast in a Zen-like state of consciousness. His transcendent state let art flow out of him so freely that he typically finished a whole canvas in a single sitting. So we're gonna try to do that tomorrow, or if you're watching this like from the future, but we're gonna recommend if you want to use a smaller format in order to facilitate a little bit. Not that it's easier. The idea of painting this in one sitting alone. And what else? And we're gonna share another of his paintings. And this one oops, we shared this one, and we're gonna share this one right here. The title is Shell and Cones, and this was painted in 1997. And we're gonna share another one. I think this is the final one. Yeah, that's the final painting that we're gonna share today. And this was titled Jerusalem Bread, and it was painted in 1981. And again, this idea of expansion and yet oppression, isolation, disconnection. So I think reading about him and his work and his childhood and his move from abstraction to figuration, and his choice of geometric, really unsettling compositions, we start to understand how there's a connection between everything, essentially. So that's it. Just a couple of notes, because he was extremely well known, I guess, in like small circles. He was represented by the Marlboro Gallery in New York. They did a bunch of like solo shows. He was successful. He was influential. He did a lot of commissions for very important people. He was given many awards. So this is the first time that we're actually reading anything about him, and it just feels a little bit strange because it kind of like shows how limited and reductionist the art world really is, because it's all about what a bunch of people want to write about, and they leave so many people outside. But so art critic Marco Livingstone wrote that Arica bridged the modern avant-garde of pure abstraction with traditions of observational drawing and painting, stretching back to the Renaissance and beyond. He was truculently insistent that he was not part of any return to figuration, but rather had found his own way as a post-abstract representational artist. So anyhow, this idea of everything is contemporary. We have said this before, and we love reading bits and pieces that reminds us of, or paragraphs of that. Everything is contemporary. Nothing is new. So yeah, he never drew from memory or photographs, aiming to depict the truth of what lay before his eyes at that moment. So he was interested in directness and natural light, and not having any filter in between him and his interaction with reality. So his compositions were very radical. And again, we're just going to go back. We're going to do a little brief reset, and we're going to go back. This is going to be the inspiration for our work. We are encouraging or asking anyone joining us to pick one piece of pottery, a vase or a bowl or a platter or anything, and then pick one surface. And the idea will be to reduce the focal points to 2, perhaps 3, if you count the background. And you could, as options, you could keep it monochromatically binary, black and white. So initially we thought of titling this series White Vase, Black Surface, but I think that already has so many implications that we don't like. So vase, surface. Pick one piece of pottery, pick one surface, put them together, and then you can decide. You want color, you want everything to be the same hue. We encourage you to go back to or do a little Google search about Avigdor Arica and see how his life went from surviving a labor camp in the 1940s that he was sent to with his sister and mom and dad because he was Jewish, to other things that happened throughout his life. He lived in Paris and Palestine, and then he abandoned abstraction. So And then what else? So I think that's all. So we hope you join us, and thanks for being here. We appreciate it. And our usual co-host Chloe is not able to talk to us on Clubhouse right after this, but if you wanna co-host with me on Clubhouse after this presentation, if you have a bit of time, just let me know. Just send me a note, and then we'll create a room and we can just talk a little bit more. And again, the reason why we're doing this, it's because we read David Hockney's article, the art newspaper, saying that abstraction has run its course, and he makes the perfect case. And it's a brilliant article. And then at the same time, in a serendipitous way, we discovered this amazing painting that we really reacted to without knowing anything about it. And we then learned that this artist, Avigdor Arica, had very similar opinions about abstraction and observational process and painting process itself, and tradition and modernity and all that kind of stuff. So link is in the calendar. We're going to send an email with a little bit of a recap of this, and then we're going to upload the podcast. But thank you so much.